Well, today we have some interesting mysteries. The scriptures obviously did not record every single event, every single detail of every single thing that happened. The Gospel of John tells us that clearly. But today, as we've been looking at this events after the empty tomb and we start to see the sightings of Jesus, we have some interesting things. We have revealed to us one of the disciples who was leaving on the road to Emmaus. His name is Cleopas. He doesn't appear anyplace else in Scripture. Some have speculated that he's the same one as Clopas, which is the husband of Mary, one of the women that were faithful to Jesus' ministry. But there's no evidence to prove that, and it's just pure speculation. I call it divine speculation because obviously it's not a common name, or else we would find it elsewhere in Scripture. The second thing that's really interesting about today's 2 or 3 verses that we're going to look at is that we find these 2 disciples, one Cleopas and one non-named, who don't recognize Jesus at first because God has hidden his identity so that he can go back through and reveal all of the details of Scripture that tell about Jesus and why he had to go through the pain and suffering and the crucifixion. But they have just made a 7-mile trip from Jerusalem to Emmaus. And now, because of what's happened in Jesus' appearance to them, they're going to go all the way back to Jerusalem. Now remember, this is by foot, so not an easy trek. And at least this way it's downhill. Before it was uphill. But anyway, they're going all the way back to Jerusalem. There's a big crowd in an upper room. And everybody's excited because we have the women's reports that the tomb is empty. We have some saying, can't be, there's no body of Jesus. And then suddenly we find in just these 3 verses, we find a report that Jesus has appeared to Simon. Now, is this Simon Peter? Or is this another Simon? I mean, Simon was a common name. And the Scripture doesn't say Simon Peter. It just says Simon. Well, we don't know. Or at least I can't prove it one way or the other whether this is Simon Peter. But there's no place in the Scriptures, revelation of Genesis, of the 4 Gospels, that tell us when this sighting between Simon and Jesus occurred. Interesting, isn't it? It certainly wasn't at the tomb, because he went back with just the information of an empty tomb. It is not recorded that he was with the group of women when Jesus appeared to them. So when did this meeting occur? I don't know. And I don't guess you do either. If you do, be sure to drop me an email and let me know when it happened. And whether this was Simon Peter or whether this is another Simon. In any case, we want to take a look at these 3 verses and discuss them just a little bit more, and then we'll close for today. Just 3 verses, Luke 24:33 through 35. And they got up the very hour and returned to Jerusalem and found gathered together the 11 and those who were with them, saying, "The Lord has really risen and has appeared to Simon." They began to relate their experiences on the road and how he was recognized by them in the breaking of the bread. Interesting passage of Scripture. So many questions about who these men were, how Simon had seen him, but it's not recorded elsewhere in the Gospels. A lot of unanswered questions. Okay, so some very important closing points. Some of you probably already are ahead of me, but you probably said, well, yeah, we know that Peter saw Jesus before the other disciples, other apostles saw him, and after the women saw him, because we read 1 Corinthians 15:5, and it is true there in 15:5 at 1 Corinthians, it talks about Simon Peter having met Jesus and seeing him before the other 11, other 10 in this case, disciples in the upper room. So there's pretty good evidence that the Simon that is mentioned in this passage in Luke is Simon Peter, and that he did see him after the ladies saw him, and we're not sure exactly where or when or what the circumstances. But here's some interesting speculation for you, and I really like this. First of all, the first point that I want to make is that the eyes of those apostles, or disciples rather, that were on the road to Emmaus realized who Jesus was through the Scriptures. And the Scriptures say that if you'll study the Scriptures will teach you the truth, and the truth will set you free. And that's exactly what happened when Jesus explained all of the things that had to happen to him according to the Scriptures, is when their eyes were opened. But here, I would like this even better. He appeared first to the women because they were faithful, because they had faith, and because they loved him so deeply. He appeared to them first because of their faith, their faithfulness, and their love. Appeared to Peter, obviously, next sometime, because he required forgiveness and wanted forgiveness because he denied Christ 3 times, just as Christ had said. Women first, Peter next because of the need that he had for forgiveness for his denial, and then to these brand new disciples who were on the road to Emmaus, Cleopas and some other disciple, because they needed reassurance to know that he was risen, and that God would use them as a messenger to the others to substantiate that Jesus had risen. Interesting, isn't it? The order in which he revealed himself to all of those. To the women because of their faith, faithfulness, and love. To Peter because of his need of forgiveness. To the new disciples for their reassurance, and to use them as messengers to the others that he was risen. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you. Have a great day.